A 95-pound German shepherd with a reputation for tearing through Kevlar was hurtling straight at the new girl. The seasoned operators laughed, expecting her to run screaming, but they didn't know they hadn't just thrown a rookie into the cage with a monster. They had just reunited a king with his creator. The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the concrete and chain-link confines of Dam Neck Annex in Virginia. Here, the military's most elite operators honed their craft. It was a world built on adrenaline precision and an unspoken hierarchy dictated by combat deployments and sheer physical dominance. Into this world walked Sarah Jenkins. Standing at a modest 5'4", dressed in unassuming khaki tactical pants and a plain black polo, Sarah looked entirely out of place. She carried a worn leather clipboard and a canvas duffel bag, her hair pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense braid. To the men of Bravo platoon, she looked like another paper pusher from the Pentagon, some low-level administrative assistant sent down to audit their equipment or mandate a new sensitivity seminar. They couldn't have been more wrong, but Bravo platoon wasn't known for looking past the surface. In the center of the training yard, a chaotic scene was unfolding. Dust kicked up in thick clouds from the K9 enclosure, accompanied by the ferocious, gut-rattling snarls of a dog that sounded more like a wild predator than a military asset. Chief Petty Officer David Hayes, a man whose arms were covered in tribal tattoos and scars from Fallujah to Helmand Province, was shouting expletives. On the ground inside the cage, Petty Officer First Class Mike Henderson was frantically trying to roll away from a massive, solid black German shepherd. The dog, a 95-pound Czech-line beast named Titan, had completely bypassed the thick, padded bite sleeve Henderson was wearing and had clamped his jaws directly onto the reinforced shoulder of Henderson's training jacket. "Pull him off! Pull him the hell off!" Henderson yelled his boots, scrambling for purchase in the dirt. Ryan O'Connor, another heavily muscled SEAL, rushed forward with a brake stick, trying to pry the dog's jaws open. It took two grown men, both elite Tier 1 operators, nearly 3 minutes to detach the dog. When they finally managed to drag Titan back and clip him to a heavy steel tether, the dog lunged at the end of the chain, barking with such ferocity that white foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. His dark amber eyes were completely dilated. There was no training happening here. This was pure, unadulterated aggression. Sarah stood by the chain-link fence, her fingers lightly curled through the metal diamonds, watching the spectacle with quiet intensity. Her face betrayed no emotion, just deep, calculating observation. Hayes stepped out of the cage, slamming the heavy gate behind him and wiping sweat from his forehead. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tactical rig. He looked at O'Connor and shook his head. "He's done, man," Hayes growled, pulling off his leather handling gloves and throwing them onto a metal bench. "That's the third time this week he's gone off script. He doesn't respond to the German commands anymore. He doesn't respond to the shock collar. He's a liability. We take him on a night raid, he's going to get one of our guys killed, or blow our cover because he can't shut up." O'Connor nodded grimly. "Ever since Kandahar, ever since Brooks took that sniper round, the dog just broke Chief. His mind is gone. It's time to put him down. He's too dangerous to keep on base, and there's no way in hell he can be adopted out. He's a man-eater." "Excuse me." A calm, feminine voice cut through the testosterone-heavy air. Hayes and O'Connor turned to see Sarah standing a few feet away. Hayes frowned immediately, sizing her up and dismissing her in the span of 2 seconds. "Admin building is a mile down the road, sweetheart," Hayes said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're in the restricted training zone." "I know exactly where I am, Chief Hayes," Sarah replied perfectly evenly, glancing down at her clipboard before meeting his eyes again. "I'm here about the dog. O'Connor let out a short, barking laugh. They sent you to evaluate Titan. What is the SPCA getting involved in naval special warfare now? Sarah didn't flinch at the mockery. She stepped closer to the fence, her eyes fixed on Titan, who was still pacing aggressively at the end of his chain, digging deep trenches into the earth. "His name is Titan," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a strange weight. 4 years old. Born and bred for deep penetration reconnaissance. Deployed twice to Syria, once to Afghanistan. He saved 3 men during an ambush in the Arghandab Valley, but lost his handler Staff Sergeant Brooks in the process. Hayes crossed his massive arms. "So you can read a service file. Congratulations. Did that file also mention that he just nearly tore Henderson's arm out of its socket? The dog is broken, lady. He's feral. We're putting him down at 1700 hours today." "He's not broken," Sarah said softly, her eyes tracking the dog's frantic movements. "He's grieving, and he's frustrated because you're handling him like a blunt instrument. He's a check-line shepherd chief. They don't operate on brute force. They operate on a singular, unbreakable bond. You're trying to dominate him. He doesn't respect you, so he fights you." Hayes stepped forward, his ego visibly bruised. Standing over 6 feet tall, he towered over Sarah, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "Listen to me, whatever your name is," Hayes snarled. "I've been handling K9S since before you were in high school. I've trained Malinois that would take a bullet for me. Don't stand out here in your clean little polo shirt and tell me how to manage a combat dog. If you think you know so much, why don't you go in there and show us how it's done?" It was a bluff, a harsh, dangerous bluff, meant to humiliate her and send her packing. It was the ultimate SEAL hazing tactic, put up or shut up. But Hayes didn't know who he was talking to. He didn't know that Dr. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just a behaviorist. She was the chief architect of the Department of Defense's most classified, ghost-tier K9 breeding and training program. She didn't just understand military working dogs. She engineered them. Sarah looked away from the dog and slowly looked up at Hayes. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. "All right," Sarah said simply. She dropped her canvas duffel bag onto the dirt. "Give me a sleeve." For a second, the training yard went dead silent. O'Connor and Hayes exchanged a bewildered look. Henderson, who was icing his bruised shoulder on the sidelines, suddenly sat up, wincing. "Hold on, Chief," Henderson warned, his voice tight. "She's not wearing body armor. That dog is 95 pounds of muscle and teeth. He hits like a truck. He'll snap her arm in half." Hayes hesitated, the reality of his own dare catching up to him. He wanted to teach the arrogant civilian a lesson, but he didn't want a death on his hands. "Look, lady, I was making a point. You don't have the clearance or the physical capability to step into that cage. Just sign the euthanasia paperwork and go back to Washington. I'm not signing anything until I perform a hands-on evaluation," Sarah stated firmly. She unzipped her duffel bag and pulled out a heavy Kevlar-lined bite sleeve. It looked incredibly bulky against her slender frame. She began strapping it onto her left arm, her movements practiced and fluid. "You issued a challenge, Chief. As the ranking handler currently on this deck, you are required to allow a specialized behaviorist a final assessment before terminating a Tier 1 asset. I am that behaviorist. Open the gate." O'Connor snorted, shaking his head. "She wants to play hero, Chief. Let her get a taste of him. We'll keep him on the tether. When she starts crying, we pull her out." Hayes ground his teeth together. "Fine. But you stay exactly 5 feet inside that gate. You don't make sudden movements. You don't look him in the eye. If he lunges, you drop the sleeve and back away slowly." Understood. I know the protocols, Sarah said quietly. She walked toward the heavy chain-link gate. Inside the enclosure, Titan noticed the movement. The dog stopped pacing. His massive head snapped toward Sarah, his ears pinning flat against his skull. The hair on his back, a ridge of coarse black fur, stood straight up. A low, rumbling growl began to vibrate in his chest so deep it sounded like an idling diesel engine. O'Connor unlatched the gate, pulling it open just enough for Sarah to slip inside. As soon as she was through, he pushed it shut with a loud metallic clang, leaning his body weight against it. "All right, sweetheart," O'Connor mocked through the fence. "Show us the magic." Sarah stood just inside the perimeter. The dusty air smelled of copper sweat and animal aggression. 60 feet away at the end of his heavy steel chain, Titan lowered his front half, dropping into a predatory stance. He was coiled like a spring, every muscle tense, saliva dripping from his dark jaws. Then Hayes made a fatal mistake. Thinking Sarah needed a real demonstration of the dog's aggression to scare her off quickly, he reached over to the wall-mounted release lever that controlled the K9 tether. "Let's see how she handles a real threat," Hayes muttered to O'Connor, and he pulled the lever. Clack! The heavy steel carabiner holding Titan's chain detached. The dog was completely loose. Henderson screamed from the bench. "Chief, what the hell are you doing? He's got the sleeve, he'll just hit the sleeve!" Hayes yelled back, though a spike of pure panic suddenly pierced his chest. Titan didn't hesitate. Free from the chain, the massive German shepherd exploded forward. He didn't just run, he launched himself across the dirt, his paws tearing chunks of earth into the air. He was a heat-seeking missile, 95 pounds of lethal intent, closing the 60-foot gap in a matter of seconds. Outside the cage, the SEAL's bravado vanished instantly. "Open the gate!" Hayes roared, diving toward O'Connor. "Get her out, he's going for her throat!" O'Connor fumbled desperately with the heavy latch, but his hands slipped on the metal. Titan was closing in 40 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet. Sarah didn't run. She didn't back away. She didn't even raise the bulky bite sleeve to protect her face. Instead, in a move that defied every instinct of human survival, she reached over with her right hand and unbuckled the bite sleeve. She let the heavy Kevlar padding drop uselessly into the dirt at her feet. She was completely unprotected. "No!" Henderson screamed, watching in horror. Titan was 10 feet away, leaping into the air, his jaws opening wide, aiming directly for Sarah's chest to take her to the ground. Sarah stood perfectly still, locked eyes with the flying apex predator, and in a voice that cut through the chaos like a whip crack, she shouted a single sharp word in a highly obscure Czech dialect. "SMRT." It was a classified command, a kill switch word that meant absolute dead freeze. Mid-air Titan's eyes widened. Recognition sharp and profound flashed in the dog's amber eyes. The massive dog hit the dirt and instantly dug all 4 paws into the ground, skidding wildly. A cloud of dust completely enveloped them. Outside the fence, Hayes and O'Connor froze their hands, gripping the chain-link hearts pounding in their throats. They expected to hear screams. They expected to see blood soaking the dirt. The dust slowly began to clear. Sarah was still standing completely unharmed, her hands resting casually at her sides. At her feet, the terrifying, unmanageable man-eating monster was completely unrecognizable. Titan was pressed flat against the ground in a perfect, rigid, tactical downstay. His chin was resting on the toes of Sarah's boots. He was trembling not with aggression, but with overwhelming anticipation, letting out a soft, high-pitched whine that sounded like a whimpering puppy. Sarah looked down at the massive dog. The severe expression on her face melted away, replaced by a warm, maternal softness. She leaned down and gently traced a thick, jagged scar across the dog's snout. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. Titan let out a joyous yelp, rolling onto his back and exposing his belly, his tail thumping against the dirt so hard it kicked up fresh dust. Outside the cage, 3 Tier 1 Navy SEALs stood with their mouths hanging open, paralyzed by shock. Sarah looked up from the dog, her eyes locking onto Chief Hayes through the fence. "As I was saying, Chief," Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "He doesn't respect you, but he remembers the woman who raised him." The heavy iron gate of the training enclosure groaned open. Chief Hayes stepped inside his boots, crunching loudly against the dry Virginia dirt. He didn't look at Sarah with condescension anymore. He looked at her as if she were an unexploded ordnance. Henderson and O'Connor flanked him, their eyes darting nervously between the slender woman and the massive black dog that was now happily nuzzling her hand.